Welcome to my messy studio, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm an artist and a fountain pen enthusiast. And in this video, I'll be showing you some of the finest fountain pens in my collection. That is to say, pens that produce the finest line width. I'm first going to explain why a pen with a very fine tip is essential to your art supply arsenal, and then give you some recommendations for what to get. Let's get started. But before I begin, I want to quickly remind you about my channel membership program. For a small monthly subscription, members receive 2 long-form classes per month and other exclusive content, and get priority to have their questions answered. Okay, back to the lesson. So, why do you need a pen with a super fine nib? To demonstrate, I'm going to render a simple sphere, starting the drawing with a Pilot Kakuno with a transparent green body with a fine nib, and then switching over to a Pilot Kakuno with a white body, which has an extra fine nib. The main reason you need a pen with a fine nib is that it makes it easier to do something that's quite difficult in pen and ink, creating soft halftones. These are areas in the form that are neither in light nor shadow and appear at the edges as shadows. They help create a sense of roundness, and without them, the forms appear overly angular and harsh. So, if I'm rendering a sphere, I can start with a fine nib and render the shadow areas. But when I get to the edge of the shadow, where it needs to gradually transition from light to dark, I'll switch over to the extra fine for that very delicate work. Really, this transition from light to dark is just as important to get right as the contour, since it tells the viewer what's happening on the inside surface of the form. If done incorrectly, the entire drawing will break down, and using an extra fine nib in these areas gives you extra control in this very crucial step. Since halftones are also present in the lighter part of the form as subtle surface detail, this is another place where the artist can benefit from using a fine pen. This is especially true when using black ink and working on white, as I'm doing here. If a halftone is too harsh in the lighter areas, it can break the delicate sense of volume, or even worse, appear as texture. A fine pen allows you to be softer and build value more gradually. It's of course important to remember that the ink and paper choice will also play a crucial part in how fine the lines will be. Some inks have a very wet flow, or have a tendency to spread when put down, resulting in wider lines. Some papers will make the ink feather, also resulting in a wider line. The paper and ink choices always matter, of course, but I find that in a fine pen, the choice has to be just right. For this demonstration, I'm using platinum carbon ink and working on Stonehenge white paper, a brilliant white with a medium tooth, which is one of my favorites. Besides making it easier to be softer in shadow transitions and halftones, a fine nib also allows you to create a stronger sense of depth in landscape drawing. Since thick lines appear close and thin lines appear far away, using a very fine nib in background areas will give your drawing the strongest possible illusion of depth. A very fine nib also allows you to apply value with light hatching that will not interfere with the textures in your drawing. This is an important principle. If the hatching is as strong as the lines that were used to make the leaves and the branches, then it'll create confusion, and the viewer will not be able to tell which lines represent value and which lines represent texture. Hatching must never be as strong as texture, and using a very fine nib creates a separation, with thicker lines in the trunk and leaves reading as texture, and thinner lines and the hatching reading as value. So far, we've seen that the fine nib can play an essential supporting role. But it can also be a soloist in a number of traditional hatching methods, the most important of which is called parallel hatching, where straight hatching is applied in multiple layers, all in the same direction. This method requires a very fine nib, since thick line weights create a very harsh, uneven effect. Using a lighter, more transparent ink makes it easier to control the values, but if the pen is fine enough, you can create a soft effect even when using black ink on pure white paper. By the way, if you haven't noticed, I'm using a different pen here. This is the wonderful Pilot Elite, a vintage pocket pen from the 1970s that I'm going to talk about when giving my recommendations, which I'm going to do right now. Some time ago, I reviewed this pen, the Platinum 3776 Ultra Extra Fine, which puts down just about as fine a line as you can get from an out-of-the-box fountain pen. This is a very nice pen, but with a price tag hovering over $100, out of reach for many artists, and just not practical for everyday use in the rough, messy environment of the studio or the field. Unfortunately, many of the other options are equally expensive. One of them is the Pilot 912 with something called a posting nib, a pen that puts down a very fine line, but also costs around $200. It's a wonderful pen that I don't have, but have had the pleasure of trying, but again, out of reach for most artists and impractical for everyday use. Then there's the vintage route. Pens with very fine tips were common back in the day in the period from the early 1900s to around 1950. And I have a number of them that put down lines as fine, if not finer, than the Platinum 3776. This one happens to be filled with lighter brown ink. The problem is, obtaining one might not be cheaper, and old pens carry their own host of problems when it comes to practical usage. This one is an old Wall Eversharp from the early 1900s, and the nib on it is very, very fine. And I do use it occasionally, but it's a stressful experience, and I'm constantly worrying that it's going to roll off the table. And since it doesn't easily come apart for cleaning, I will never use it with waterproof ink. Yet another option is to get a custom ground nib from a nib grinding service. This is an Opus 88 Omar with an excellent custom extra fine grind from fpnibs.com, which goes finer than the Platinum 3776. This can be a great way to go, allowing you to get exactly the nib you want in the pen body of your choice. But again, this is not cheap, with most services these days running you around $75. Fortunately for us, there are plenty of excellent and affordable out-of-the-box options, and while none of them go quite as fine as the Platinum 3776, they are very close. All of these pens are Japanese cartridge converters, meaning that they take either ink cartridges or use converters that fill from a bottle. And all of these pens are light, easy to clean, and sturdy, perfect for use in the studio and out in the field. Here are two budget pens from Pilot, both with extra fine steel nibs, the Pilot Kakuno and the Pilot Penmanship. You can get either one for under $15, and both are excellent writers that put down a very fine line, much finer than your usual Western extra fine nib. And both are surprisingly smooth for something so pointy. The flow on them is on the dry side, which is also a good thing, since a wetter flow would thicken the line width. So here is the Kakuno. And here is the Pilot Penmanship, which is a slightly unusual pen in that it has this little tiny screw-off cap. Both of them have exactly the same nib and feed, however, and equal performance. And both of them write excellently in reverse, so if I flip the nib upside down, I can get an even finer line. The only drawback with both these pens, to my mind, is that they have a faceted grip section, which I personally find awkward. However, since the nibs and feeds on all of the Pilot steel pens are exactly the same, you can switch the nib and feed on this pen into any number of other Pilot pen bodies that are more comfortable. And a great option for that is the Pilot Prera. This is a very comfortable, well-built pocket pen without those silly facets in the grip section, which you can get for, I believe, about $25. Here are two very fine, affordable offerings from the Japanese company Platinum. The Platinum Carbon Desk Pen, this is the old version, which you can still get on eBay, and the Platinum Preppy with an EF nib. The Carbon Desk Pen is a unique product that is specifically designed to be used with a waterproof platinum carbon ink. Because of this, the cap seals very tightly, preventing the pen from clogging. And even if the ink dries in it, a short soak in an ammonia-based glass cleaner will clean it right out, which is what I had to do to get this pen going. So as you can see, it puts down a very fine line, and an even finer line in reverse. I've heard reports that the newer version of this pen is not quite as nice, but again, the old version is still available on eBay for not too much money. The length of the pen is annoyingly long for most pen cases, but snipping an inch or two off the end solves that problem. The Platinum Preppy Extra Fine is an ultra-budget pen that also has a surprisingly thin, dry writing nib. Because this is a budget pen, the pen body is fragile and will crack on you sooner rather than later, but for the price, you really can't ask for much in terms of build quality. And like all Platinum pens, it caps very tightly with its proprietary spring-loaded inner cap mechanism, so this is a pen that is perfect for waterproof inks. And lastly, here are two slightly more niche recommendations. Earlier, I mentioned that vintage pens are usually not a practical option for artists, since they can be fragile, expensive, and hard to clean. There are exceptions, however, and here are two of them. These two little pocket pens from the 1970s. This one made by Pilot, this is the Pilot Elite, and this one is made by Platinum, but I couldn't find the exact model name. Both these pens are very similar in design, fitted with gold hooded nibs that put down very fine lines. These pens are durable and both take the current Pilot or Platinum cartridges. And best of all, they're remarkably affordable, considering that they both have 14 karat gold nibs, with a Pilot regularly sold on eBay for under $70, and the Platinum pen even cheaper, under $50. So here is the Pilot. Very smooth gold nib with a very, very fine line. And even finer in reverse. And here's the Platinum, equally fine. And let's see how it reverse writes. Okay, this one doesn't quite reverse write, or reverse writes so finely that it's not really usable. Truth be told, I don't want there to be a run on these pens since they haven't been fully discovered by collectors, but I would get one of these soon before people realize just how great they are. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and the finest fine nibs in my collection, and if you did, please don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned to many more tutorials like it. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you back in my messy studio very soon. Bye for now.